I'm excited for tonight. And the reason I'm excited for tonight is this is something I've been wanting to do for the last couple of years, actually. And this year, Hashem just made it work out. So we're going to do it tonight and hopefully for the next 2 weeks. We're going to put a pause on Tanya because, for two reasons. First of all, we finished chapter 8, which is really the first segment of the book, discussing the core of a Jew. From chapter 9, we move to the battle of a Jew, so it's the perfect time, if we wanted to pause. And for the next 3 weeks, we're going to be focused on the Beis Hamikdash, the Holy Temple, of which a map is hanging behind me. And there's a reason for that. I'm going to actually ask that we hand these out, if we can. This is not the exam on the last 8 chapters. This is something else. It's a little handbook that I want to use as our text for tonight and for the next 2 weeks. We are in a period in the Jewish calendar that's called Beis Hamikdash, between the straits. It's the saddest time of the Jewish year. Yesterday, the 17th of Tammuz, was a public fast day. It marks the day that the walls were breached. The walls of Jerusalem were breached just before the destruction of the temple, and as one of my friends from Israel pointed out, somehow this year nobody has to explain why there's a public fast day when a wall is breached. We all understand. I remember last year and years before, people want to know, so what if the wall is breached? What does that mean? But now we've lived through October 7th, and we know that when your enemy is hiding behind the line and they breach the wall, it's the beginning of catastrophe. And so it was for the Jewish people in Israel. The breaching of the walls of Jerusalem marked the last thread of fortification that the Jews had before our enemies essentially did the greatest destruction to us. And it concludes with Tisha B'Av, which is exactly 3 weeks later. 17th of Tammuz is on a Tuesday this year. Tisha B'Av is always on the same day. 3 weeks later on a Tuesday, it's also a public fast day. And that marks the day of the actual destruction of the temple, actually both temples. Tisha B'Av historically is a day that Hashem himself called crying for generations. Any major tragic event in the Jewish nation's history happened on Tisha B'Av. All the way back to the desert, the day that the Jewish people found out they're going to be staying for 40 years was on Tisha B'Av. And the temple was destroyed twice on Tisha B'Av. Beitar, the great city, was mowed down on Tisha B'Av. Even to recent history, the expulsion from Spain in 1492 was calculated to be on Tisha B'Av. The Germans, the Nazis, Yimach Shemam, always planned out special whatever they did on Tisha B'Av because they knew that it carried this sad connotation and misfortune for the Jewish people. And so it's been throughout all our generations. And till today, some 1950 years later, we mark and we mourn the destruction of the temple by fasting, by coming to shul. This year on Monday night in 2 weeks, we read Lamentations, we read Eicha, the saddest book of the Jewish Tanakh, and we sit on the floor. We don't sit on a regular chair. Many, many things that we do to show our mourning. And the mourning already begins in these weeks. According to Jewish law, we're no longer supposed to listen to music, starting yesterday till 3 weeks from now. No instrumental music. We're not supposed to take haircuts or shave for the next 3 weeks. Like a mourner. We're supposed to act like a mourner for the next 3 weeks, especially in the first 9 days of the month of Av. And all of that is because it's a sad time. And it is a sad time. Yet, once Chassidus was revealed, once the inner dimension of the Torah was revealed, we're always obligated to find something redemptive in everything sad. Because Chassidus came and placed such a tremendous focus on joy, we have to find something good, something, at least a good takeaway from everything sad, to counterbalance it, and because the truth of everything is goodness, since God, who is all good, is at the core of everything. And it was Hashem who orchestrated, not the Romans, not the Babylonians. They didn't do their destruction on their own. It was Hashem who orchestrated everything top to bottom. He oversaw it. And if he allowed for the destruction to take place with all the mournfulness that it carries, Hashem being all good, there has to be something that we can look at in a positive light. And the Rebbe, for years, already since the beginning of his leadership, always would point to the law of Shabbat. On Shabbat, we're forbidden to do labor. And one of the forbidden labors is demolishing. There's 39 different categories of primary labor that's forbidden on Shabbos. One of them is demolishing. However, to halachically qualify as demolishing, the demolishing needs to be done with the intent to rebuild. Destructive demolishing is not considered a creative labor on Shabbos because it's not creative, it's only destructive. If you destroy something with the intention to rebuild, now you've done a malacha, now you've done work on Shabbos. Says the Rebbe, Hashem does every mitzvah that he gives to his people. That means that if Hashem destroys, it cannot qualify as destruction unless there's the plan to rebuild. Otherwise, it's just destructive destruction for the sake of it. And that's not allowed according to the Torah. In other words, that's not, it doesn't have a binding effect according to the Torah. Every churban, every destruction has to bring with it the intent to rebuild. Hence, says the Rebbe, when Hashem orchestrated the destruction of the first temple, there was already the intent to rebuild the second temple bigger and better. And when the second temple was destroyed, there had to be baked into the cake the plans and the intent to rebuild bigger, better, and more eternally, as will be the third Beis Hamikdash when Mashiach comes. It's going to last forever. As a matter of fact, the Midrash alludes to this by telling the story that in the moment of the destruction of the temple, there was an Arab who was a neighbor of a Jew, and the Arab was plowing his field, and his cow let out a strong moo. That's what it says in the Midrash. Ga'ata parato shelato yishmeili. The Ishmaelite's cow let out a strong moo. Yeah? And he said, this is the sign of the destruction of the temple. It was a mournful moo. It was a sad sound. A second later, the cow mooed a second time. And the message was, in this moment, Mashiach was born. In the moment of destruction, the future Redeemer was born, who was supposed to be the future Redeemer of the time. We believe every generation, if they're fitting, there's always a Redeemer that's alive. So right in the moment of destruction, the Redeemer was created. As a matter of fact, it gets even more than that. The Midrash makes it sound like the Redeemer was born after the destruction. There's a piece of Talmud which indicates that there was already redemption at the time in the moment of destruction itself. And that is that the Talmud tells us that the Romans, when they came to destroy the second temple, they didn't just destroy. They wanted to deface it. They wanted to purposely really make it look bad before they set it aflame. And so there's many tragic and horrific episodes that happened at the time. But one of the things that Titus, the emperor who was leading the invasion, one of the things he wanted to do was he wanted to go into the Holy of Holies, because he knew that only the Kohen Gadol, only the high priest was allowed to be there once a year on Yom Kippur. Otherwise it was reserved. No Jewish people can go in. It was the most sacred place on earth for the Jewish people. So he went into the Holy of Holies, took a Torah scroll and laid it on the floor, brought in a prostitute and had relations with her in the Holy of Holies on top of the Torah scroll. All in order to make his defacement the maximum that it could be. Very just horrific and very, very graphic. The Talmud goes into detail. And one of the things it says is that Titus noticed, that the kruvim, the cherubs, that were in the Holy of Holies, there were two sets of cherubs. There was a set on top of the Holy Ark, which was not extant in the second temple. It was hidden. The Ark was hidden in the first temple time. It wasn't there the second temple. But there was also a set of cherubs engraved into the wall behind the Holy of Holies on the west side. And the Talmud tells us that in the moment that Titus came into the Holy of Holies, he saw the form of the two cherubs, because there was two, hugging. They were locked in an embrace. And he used it to make fun. He said, look, in the most sacred place on earth, what do the Jews idolize? They idolize a male figure and a female figure in union. And he made a big thing out of it. But the commentaries ask a question. In a different piece of Talmud it says that if the Kohen Gadol, if the high priest, when he went into the Holy of Holies, if he wanted to know if God was in favor with the Jewish people or not, he would look at the formation of the cherubs on the Aron. If they were facing each other, that means God was in divine favor. Miraculously, they would face about if Hashem was in anger at the Jewish people. So all the commentaries want to know, you would think the time of destruction is the time of God's ultimate anger. Right? Why is Hashem allowing the temple to be destroyed if not that he's angry with his people? And not only were the Kruvim facing each other, according to the Gemara's account, they were actually locked in an embrace. If there's any time for the cherubs not to be locked in an embrace, it's then. How does it make any sense? So the Rebbe has a very novel approach. And it's a Hasidic approach. You have to have a Hasidic head to be able to appreciate it. And it's based on another piece of Talmud. Keep on bringing more Talmuds. Psalms chapter 79, which we read 2 days ago on the 16th of the month. We read it every 16th of the month. It says, Mizmor le'asaf, begins, a song by Asaf, to mourn for the fact that Hashem destroyed Jerusalem. So the Talmud says, how do you title a mournful psalm with the word a song? How could it be Mizmor le'asaf if you're talking about Hashem's destruction of the temple? So the Talmud says, the song is that instead of pouring out his wrath on his people, Hashem poured out his wrath on a home of wood and stone to allow the Jewish people to endure eternally. In other words, in a certain sense, yes, the Churban marked the end of an era. Yes, the Churban, the temple's destruction, marked the beginning of the worst exile that the Jewish people ever experienced. But at the same time, it was Hashem pouring out his wrath on a home of wood and stone so as not to pour out his full wrath on his people. There was a mercy, there was a compassion, there was a light within the darkness. And so in a certain way, the destruction itself can be construed as an expression of Hashem's love for his people. Yes, you angered me with your deeds. Yes, you may not be living up to your full potential. Yes, you may not be allowing your souls to shine forth. But you know what that's going to lead to? Only a destruction of a physical home. It's never going to lead to the destruction of the Jewish soul. It's never going to lead to the destruction of the Jewish people. With the people, I'm always locked in an embrace. So the Rebbe says that, as a matter of fact, those cherubs locked in an embrace were the symbol of the ultimate inner dimension of the destruction. Externally, most tragic, horrific massacres and a Holocaust, bigger than the Holocaust that we know, took place then. And that cannot be justified, and we have to scream to Hashem to bring Mashiach. At the same time, we have to know that there was something inside, there was something redemptive about the destruction, and that was the testimony to the fact that the Jewish people aren't going anywhere. And therefore, at the same time that we mourn, we can look hopefully to the future and know that there's going to be a return, and there's going to be a renewal, and there's going to be a redemption. What do we do in the interim? The fact of the matter is we don't have a temple. We are in exile. We can't fulfill most of the mitzvahs. Only 86 mitzvahs out of the 613 are applicable today.
How many?
86. It's a bit inaccurate. It's 86 out of the 248 because all 365 negative prohibitions are technically always in effect. Like you can always not do something, you know. I could not go into the Holy of Holies even now as I'm sitting here. You know what I'm saying? I'm still fulfilling, but
You're doing a great job.
but I got 86 positive mitzvahs that I can do. We're missing literally 2/3. So how do we make up for it? So one of the ways we make up for it is by learning about the Holy Temple. By learning about the structure and what it used to be like and how they used to do the service. And this is written explicitly in a midrash on the front page of the handbook. And I want to take 2 minutes and read through it. The front page, I put the Hebrew, just for those that are familiar, you can see the Hebrew with some beautiful poetic expressions, but we're going to read it in the English. Okay, starting from the top. Rav Shmuel bar Abba said, this is a midrash called Tanchuma. Rav Shmuel bar Abba said, the Holy One, blessed be He, said to Israel, even though the temple is destined to be destroyed in the future and the sacrifices to be nullified, do not allow yourself to forget the order of the sacrifices, but rather be careful to read about them and review them. And if you occupy yourselves with them, I will consider it for you as if you were occupied with the sacrifices themselves. So by learning, it's as if we're doing it. And if you want to know that this is so, if you need a proof, come and see the following proof. That when the Holy One, blessed be He, showed Yechezkel the form of the temple, the book of Ezekiel and the prophets, it's got like 40, 50 chapters. At the very end, the very last section, Yechezkel tells of a vision that he beheld, where Hashem took him to Jerusalem, the site of the future third temple, and gave him a vision detailing the plans for it. Huh?
Is that the wheel? Ezekiel saw
The wheel that's in chapter 1. This is chapter 43.
Well, way off.
I mean, it's the same book, end of the book. So it says, when Hashem showed Yechezkel the form, what did he say? What were the words that he used? He said, describe the temple to the house of Israel. Let them be ashamed of their iniquities. In other words, that's why they don't have it now, because they have sins. And measure the plan. So while they're in exile, because Yechezkel was the prophet that said prophecy in exile, between the first and second temples, Hashem told him, check it out, here's the plan, tell it to Israel. Yechezkel responded to the Holy One, blessed be He. He says, that's not fair. He says, until now we're put into exile in the land of our enemies. And you say to me to go and inform Israel about the form of the temple and write it in their eyes, and they should preserve its form and all of its statutes and do them? Are they able to do them? It's like telling a handicapped guy, go run a marathon. That's not fair. The guy's in a wheelchair. He can't do what you want. You're telling the Jews, go build a temple. They're in exile. They can't do it. It's like dangling, the thing in front of the kid, and he can't reach it. Leave them until they emerge from the exile, and afterwards I'll go and tell them. No problem. Come back to Israel, and we'll give the instruction. We'll have a gathering. We'll make a meeting. I'll tell them all the plans. So the Holy One, blessed be He, said to Yechezkel, here's the operative lines, the last paragraph on the page, said Hashem, and because my children are in exile, the building of my house should be idle. Just because we're in Galus, therefore we shouldn't build the temple. The Holy One, blessed be He, said to him, its reading in the Torah is as great as its building. Go and say it to them, and they will occupy themselves to read the form of the temple in the Torah, and in reward for its reading, that they occupy themselves to read about it, I count it for them as if they were occupied with the building of the temple. Clear instruction. Hashem says, you think that when the temple, the physical house is sitting in Jerusalem, that's when it's built. And when it's not there, that's when it's not built. No. Even when you're in exile, you can build a temple. Not the physical one, but you can build it, construct it, by constructing it in the Torah's lens. By learning in the Torah about how the temple used to look, we're literally putting it up.
So, did he want them to do sacrifices, even though there was
No. No actual rituals, but to learn about it. As a matter of fact, the Rebbe would say that this is the comfort. A Jew finds comfort in studying about the temple when he doesn't have it physically, knowing that the more I'm familiar with it, the more there's going to be a aha when Mashiach comes. That Tzemach Tzedek used to say that. The third Rebbe used to say, why do we study all of this Kabbalah and this mysticism? We don't even get half of the stuff. And we talk about parallel universes and lights and energies and all these things. It's because when Mashiach comes, that's going to be our bread and butter. It's going to be right in front of us. And the people that learn more are going to be able to faster say, aha, now I get it.
So that only applies if it's something you can't do, right?
Right.
That concept. 'Cause
Yes.
If you're studying something that you can do and you don't do it, it's a mitzvah,
Then you got other problems.
then this doesn't apply.
That's right.
Okay.
No, we can't build a temple.
Right.
So we build it through learning. And so in 1976, the Rebbe came down to a surprise gathering. Usually his gatherings were predetermined. You knew, in the last Shabbos of every month, he was going to farbring. On the special days in the Chabad calendar, he was going to farbring. Here, he announced half an hour before, surprise farbringing. I'm coming down from his office to the basement of 770 where the farbringings were held. And they hurriedly, set up the benches like they knew how to do. The Rebbe came down, And the Rebbe quoted this midrash. And he said, I'm making a new institution. I ask all my followers, and I ask my followers to influence all those who they can influence, that during these 3 weeks, from the 17th of Tammuz till Tisha B'Av, when we mourn the temple's destruction mainly, we should study the laws of the construction of the Holy Temple as they are delineated in the Rambam. Maimonides was the only one to codify these laws. We have the Mishnah, but they're codified as law in the Rambam. He said, I want everybody to study the Rambam. So much so that he even paid for a special printing of a manuscript version of the Rambam's temple laws. And incessantly, from then on, in 1976 it was like within a special stress. But from then on, every single year during these 3 weeks, every time the Rebbe spoke publicly, he would expound on some law of the Rambam's laws related to the temple. He would examine it literally line by line, word by word. He went into every single detail and showed the extreme genius of every minuscule word and precise detail that the Rambam puts in. But even if you don't get all the way deep in, it's just important to go through the basics, the layout, the plan, what used to happen where. People actually are just super not familiar with it. And this was literally the most central place in our religion for hundreds of years. So up here is a diagram of the second temple as the Rambam describes it. We're dealing with, 1,000 years of difference between the actual time and the time it was written down and described. Till then it was all oral. So there are many unknown nuances and many arguments about specific details. The general details everybody agrees on. But exactly how different elements of the structure looked is a matter of debate. This is the Rambam's diagram. He drew this in his own hand. My brother made this, to be more exact to today's eye. But we have the Rambam's handwritten version of this. So it's pretty exact, the way he depicts the temple from an aerial point of view. Others have a little bit of a different variation with the main building. You could actually see it in your handout. If you look at page 215, literally the next page, if you flip the page, and you look at that little rectangle inside, the pink part, it's kind of flipped. It's the opposite of this diagram. It's turned over upside down, but if...
This is north-south.
Right, this goes according to the regular compass rules. But if you flip it over, you can see that in this version, the pink, which is the main building structure, is a little bit like a T, right? Versus the Rambam has that as a square. Here it's a little bit like a T. That's probably one of the biggest debate issues as to the structure of the main building. But other than that,
Like a horseshoe.
huh?
A horseshoe.
A horseshoe?
Well, this one.
Yeah, the pink on the.
The pink one.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, I see. Right.
It has to do with a debate in the Mishnah. The Mishnah says two contradictory statements. The Mishnah says that the Heichal, the main structure, was 100 amas in length by 100 amas in width. An amma is a cubit. It translates to roughly about 1.5 feet. So 150 feet long, 150 feet wide. That's one Mishnah. The other Mishnah says the Heichal structure was wide in the front and narrow in the back like a lion. Same way if you look at a lion, its face, with the mane and everything kind of features big. And then behind the neck kind of narrows down. So the Heichal was wide in the front, narrow in the back. So the question is how to resolve those two statements. How does it be 100 by 100, which implies a square, and then wider and narrower in the back? So for that reason, most commentaries are of the opinion that this was the structure, the imagery of the pink, because it's 100 in length, that's for sure, and it's 100 in width at the longest point. There was extensions on the sides that went for the full 100, even though in the back it kind of narrowed down like a lion. That's the way they 215 we're on. It's the first page.
What does the Rambam say about the?
If you see the page numbers.
What does the Rambam say?
Now, the Rambam says clearly no. It was a cube. It was literally a square. 100 by 100.
Floor,
Huh?
or are we talking about the ceiling?
Oh, that's another answer in the commentary. Some say at the floor level it was 100 by 100. On ceiling it was a little bit narrower.
What does the Rambam say about the line? About that Mishnah?
So what does the Rambam say about the lion? I don't know if you can see it on this picture, but this is not an exact square. It's a little bit like a trapezoid. Right? It's a little bit coming in.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Now,
Yeah, I see it.
in this figure, the line drawn across the middle, at both ways, length and width, is indeed 100 exactly. It expands a little bit here to a little more than 100. It narrows back there to a little less than 100. So he says it was 100 by 100 in the middle lines. A little bit of a trapezoidal shape. Is that a word? To accommodate for the lion figure. But other than that, it was mostly square.
He says that they're going to be
It's a little different. It's a little different, the dimensions. It's also a matter of debate because the verses in Yechezkel that describe it are extremely obscure. It's one of the most obscure parts of the entire Tanakh. The Rambam himself actually makes that point, which is going to be my next point that I was going to lead into. The concept of Hashem having a home on this earth is basically part and parcel of the story of the Jewish people. Right after the Jews left Egypt and became a nation, got the Torah, the very first instruction that they got was Ve'asu li mikdash v'shachanti betocham. Make me a holy temple and I will dwell amongst them. Over time, this mitzvah got fulfilled in progressively more permanent ways. The first home that Hashem had in earth was in the desert, the Mishkan. That was a portable structure. It was never locked into the ground. Even the way it was built wasn't like a home. It was curtains for a roof. Very, very loose. But it accompanied the Jews for 40 years in the desert. And it was a fulfillment of that mitzvah. The moment the Jews came into Israel, they set up shop in a place called Gilgal for 14 years while they divided and conquered the land. And the Mishkan was the same Mishkan as the desert, but it was now fixed in place. So while the objects of the structure were not permanent, but its fixture was more permanent. Then that Mishkan was dismantled, and they moved to a place called Shiloh. You can still visit the site today. And there was a Mishkan there for 369 years. Very long time. All through the era of the judges, extremely long period of time. And that Mishkan already was even more permanent in structure. The walls were made of stone, even if the roof was still curtains. They used the curtains from the desert, same curtains, hundreds of years. But the wall was made of stone. Then that Mishkan was destroyed, and they went to another place, Nov and Givon, another Mishkan was built. And finally, after King David passed away and King Solomon took the throne, Hashem gave the instruction, it's time for a permanent structure in Yerushalayim, an actual building attached to the ground, etc.
Were they given instructions for each?
Yes, every single one came with an instruction. And it was kind of seen as this chain where the more the Jews settled into their homeland, the more God's home became settled. Because God and the Jews play this dance and this mirror image in which the relationship goes both ways. And whatever happens to the Jewish people reflects itself on Hashem. What happens to Hashem reflects on the Jewish people. And ultimately, the place in Jerusalem was chosen, and that was the spot, which, by the way, it was a spot that was holy since the beginning of time. According to tradition, Adam was created at the point of earth of the Holy of Holies. That point where the ark sat in the Kodesh HaKodashim was the place where Adam was created from. It says in the Midrash that Adam brought a sacrifice. He built an altar on that spot. Later on, Noah, when Noah exited the ark after the flood, he found that spot and he brought an altar. Avraham, Yitzchak, Yaakov, all our forefathers, when it says in the Torah that they brought a sacrifice in Jerusalem, and it does, at each one at different points in their life, they were there. That was Mount Moriah. On that mountain, on the Temple Mount, they brought these sacrifices. It was always hallowed as a sacred place for all of humanity. Everybody knew it. Even the Jerusalem Talmud says that when the idolatrous nations took over and they wanted to make their mark at every point in the land of Israel, they built an altar for an idol on every single mountain besides this one. Because this one was known to be a holy place. Everybody knew about it. And so it was only appropriate that the temple would be built on that spot. The first temple was built, stood for 410 years. It was destroyed. 70 years later, the Jews came back and made the second temple, which stood for another 420 years. And then it was destroyed, and we're still waiting for the third one. And that's the Temple Mount. In the context of the Beis Hamikdash, in the context of the Holy Temple, carved out or kind of built in to the mountain was this square that you see on page 215. On page 215, you have the representation of the square known as the Temple Mount, and then this little rectangle known as the Temple Building, Beis Hamikdash itself. So you have this big area, it's called the Har Habayis, and then the little area called the Beis Hamikdash. You can see it's not centered, because it wasn't. It wasn't centered. It was closest to the west, a little closer to the north, a little closer to the east, and furthest from the south. And there's different reasons for it. Technically speaking, it has to do with the point of access. If you look at the structure of Jerusalem today, the southernmost point of Temple Mount was easiest access to people in Jerusalem. Most Jews came from here, so it was important to have a bigger area of open space down here. And then from the north was second. From the west was the hardest access. Least people came up from the west, and therefore they made the smallest point. That's one technical reason. There's more midrashic, homiletic reasons for it, but that was it. And this whole area, the big area, the Temple Mount area, was 500 by 500 cubits, which comes out to about 750 by 750 feet. Tiny when you think about the idea that all of the Jewish people had to make it onto there.
Yeah.
And it is discussed, how this phenomenon took place. Either it's miraculous. King Herod later, without getting into the whole lengthy history of it, he expanded this area. He expanded this area to a much bigger size. But yeah, it was pretty miraculous because it was pretty small. But that was called the Temple Mount. That was called the Har Habayis. You had to be at a certain level of ritual holiness to be able to even enter. Different levels of impurity would disqualify you from even going there. But assuming that you were pure, you were able to go. Even Gentiles were able to go onto the Temple Mount. In times of old, even Gentiles can go to the Temple Mount. They could not enter, however, the outer perimeter of the rectangle. You see the black line around the perimeter on page 215? That was the point at which Gentiles had to stop, and only Jews were allowed inside.
So the only thing that was designs were given was just the temple itself. There was leeway as far as now.
It doesn't say what exactly happened on Temple Mount. The Rambam actually writes that the entire area of the Temple Mount was roofed. It was covered.
Because the Herod modified it.
To protect from the rain. This whole area had a little covering over it.
Yeah.
It says that the front wall is the western wall that you still see today, right?
Yes. Evan makes a good point.
Well, it says it.
Huh?
It said it.
Oh, it says it here? Oh, well, you caught me.
It's not the full wall, it's just part.
Yes. When we go today to Jerusalem and we have the western wall, it's not the western wall of the temple structure. It's the western wall of the Temple Mount.
It's not even the full wall.
Where the
Huh?
Gentiles-
The outer wall, this wall over here. The wall behind the Holy of Holies, but the outer structure, not the inner one. And even that, we don't have access to the full wall. And of course, today we know it's even underground because the way Jerusalem kept on being built on top of itself.
Even the tunnel, because you can go down the tunnel now. They've been discovered.
Yes, so now you can see some of the lower areas.
Yeah.
But it's just good to know that it's not the wall of the actual temple, it's the wall of the Temple Mount.
So that faces the Mount of Olives.
That faces the Mount of Olives. Mount of Olives is over here, to the east.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah. All right. On page 216, I'm not going to go through it all now, but on page 216, you see the gates. The gates to the Temple Mount. It gives you information on what was what. But we're gonna zoom in a little bit now to page 217. Page 217 is the zoomed in version of that rectangle. Okay? And if you want to reference this picture, just flip it over. If you flip over 217, we're basically matched with this bigger diagram. I'm going to flip it over just so I can match this diagram here. But it goes like this. You know what, actually, even before we get to the diagram, the outer perimeter. Okay, the outer perimeter on 217, which we spoke about before, that's called the soreg. Soreg literally means lattice work, because that's how it was built. It was built in this shape. I don't know if you can see it on the bottom of 217, kind of like a lattice fence. It was quite low, about 40 inches tall. Yeah. It was a low divider. It was a kind of a divider. And it was a message, so that the people could not go past here. I don't know if you can see on the paper, it says, it's a recorded fact, and Josephus writes about this. He says the Soreg wall, third paragraph, had signs in both Latin and Greek, warning non-Jews not to enter. Because the Temple Mount was frequented by people of all creeds and races. They wanted to come see, what is this temple that the Jewish people talk about? But from this point, they couldn't go in, but it was there. In the spoken languages at the time.
And everyone was allowed to do sacrifice, right?
Yes. A Gentile could send a sacrifice. He couldn't go in and be there personally, but he could send a sacrifice and they would bring it on his behalf. Absolutely.
Really?
Yes. Wow. Yes. Now, once you went past the soreg, once you went past the outer perimeter, you were now in the area that's called the chel, on the top. Has different translations, this word chel. But the point is, it's the first open area where you're like kind of on premises. And when you wanted to go in to the actual temple premises, there were steps. See on the right, there's a little diagram that says steps. And this was a recurring theme in the temple's floor plan. Every time the holiness level would rise, there would be physical steps. It was a manifestation of the spiritual holiness. You can't see it from the aerial view, although they do make the diagram. I mean, you can see, at every point, you enter, there's steps. You went to the next point, there's steps. You went to the next point, there's steps. There's always steps as you go, higher and higher in holiness. Because indeed, at every point that you left, every point that you passed, the holiness would be higher. Less and less people can go in. Let's say, past here, only pure, ritually pure Israelites can go. But right here, at this line, a regular Jew couldn't go past, only a Kohen. Only a Kohen can go past this line. And then a regular Kohen can't go past this line unless he's serving. If he's serving, he can go inside. But even if he went inside, he couldn't go to the Holy of Holies, except for the high priest on Yom Kippur. So there was different levels of holiness.
There's no steps in the...
You hear the question? Everyone hear that question? Zalman says, there's no steps between the holy and the Holy of Holies.
Is he a plant in the crowd?
You see, every place there's progressive steps, but to the holiest place there's no steps. If there's any place there should be steps, it's over there. That's like, the ultimate dividing line. Nobody goes in there. Hashem is present at the highest level. How come there's no steps? Anyone have a thought?
Is it a curtain or something?
There was a curtain, that's true. There was a divider, granted.
The door's already up there. He's already, by the time he gets there, and he could go up those steps, and he could enter the Holy of Holies, he's already there. And then Yom Kippur, he's elevated naturally by Hashem.
I see.
It's not a physical transition, it's a spiritual transition.
But they're all spiritual transitions.
Yes, but this is the ultimate. You're leaving this world to be with the Holy of Holies.
I don't have
Okay?
Yeah.
And so why no steps? Because you're leaving a...
Steps are from this existence.
Ah.
Non-steps are from the spiritual.
You're like... You're right. Yeah, no, you're right there. The Rebbe gave a talk on this, and I'm going to paraphrase it. Like I'm going to rephrase it because he used almost exactly your words. You want to say something before I go there? Yeah.
It's my sense of humor. You know how if the Kohen Gadol didn't qualify and he died, they had a rope tied in.
Yes.
It would be rude to pull him down.
I see. Okay. He goes. Technically speaking, okay.
Probably wouldn't matter to him at
At
that point.
that point, pull him on a smooth floors, okay, down the steps. I don't think Hashem would be cool with that.
I hear you. Okay, I hear you.
Rabbi says there's a logic to this, right?
Yes. The Rebbe says steps can only manifest a limited jump in holiness. When you make a quantum leap from finite to infinity, steps don't do the ascension justice. They actually limit it. They make you think this is an elevation that steps can define. Steps cannot define the jump that was made when the Kohen Gadol crossed that curtain. So it would be an offense to the level of holiness to make steps. We don't have a way in the physical world to bring that out, so we just have to leave it flat. But in that sense, he was entering a completely new dimension of reality. A dimension of reality that couldn't be measured by steps. There was nothing, there was no way.
The dimensions inside the Holy of Holy made no sense.
That is true. Does everyone know that? The Talmud says that we have a tradition from our fathers that the ark did not take up space in the Holy of Holies. It was a place that was higher than space. The ark in the Torah is measured. It has a measurement. It's this amount of cubits, that amount of cubits. And the Holy of Holies is a square. It has a dimension of 20 cubits by 20 cubits. But when you would take a measuring stick, I don't know who would do this because nobody was allowed inside.
Yeah,
But-
yeah, the worker.
That's the answer.
What was this? I didn't hear.
He says the worker. He's right. The Rambam says that if they needed to do repairs in the Holy of Holies, they could lower in a box because you shouldn't be able to see around you, but they could lower from the roof. They could lower an artisan to repair. So maybe that's when they did the measuring. But he says if you take a measuring stick and you measure wall to wall, you'll get a total of 20 cubits. But then if you measured from the wall to the wall of the ark, you got 10 cubits. And if you measured from the other wall of the ark to the next wall, you got 10 cubits. But then you went wall to wall and it's 20. Makom ha'aron eino min hamidah, says the Talmud. The place of the ark didn't take up space. It was a manifestation of infinity.
It's non-linear.
It was non-linear. It was quantum. It was higher. It was a direct revelation of God in the physical sense. And so that's why there was no elevation. Even when the Rambam describes the elevation of the steps, if you look in the Hebrew, it's very rich. He says, he describes it all about the person. He says, when you would go up steps, and then you would cross the courtyard, and you would go up steps, and then you would cross the courtyard, and you would go up steps. He always describes it on the person. So the Rebbe says that also hints to this concept. Because once you went into the Holy of Holies, you were no longer a regular person. You stopped going up. You go up means you, limited, finite you in the body, goes up. The Kohen Gadol was completely transcendent. So there was no going up, he just crossed through. Anyway, that's the...
What was the demarcation, that line where the regular Jew could go up to? What was there? Was it a fence? Was it just...
Oh, what was here?
Yeah.
There was it's a little bit of a debate. Okay, there was some form of staircase.
What is the duchen?
Yes. So there's two opinions about this. Either there was just 3 steps up across the entire length, or it was a few steps, doesn't say how many, up to the ground level, then 3 more steps and 3 steps coming down. And that's where the Levites would stand and sing when sacrifices were brought. They would accompany the songs. It's like, think about if a staircase goes up here and then comes a little bit down, back to the level of the table. So they went up a little bit and then back down to the level of the ark, of the Azara.
It was both a stairway and an obstruction of vision.
Right.
How did these dimensions track the moving temple through the desert?
Oh no, the temple in the desert was a completely different dimension. It was much, much smaller. Much, much smaller.
And I'll be able to take it apart and move.
Yeah, because it was portable. That's probably why. Okay. I think we're going to leave it here. You want a question?
One question.
One question. The takeaway is the same. Our attitude, as distant as we are, so far away, we have to be able to remember that there's light at the end of the tunnel. And as the story of Napoleon, we'll close with this. When Napoleon was fighting his way into Russia, he was trying to take over in the famous War of 1812. And they say, don't know if it's been verified or if it's recorded elsewhere. You know what I'm talking about?
No, but it's, yeah, it's debated, yeah.
It's
whether-
a sketchy
whether he
story?
really said it, yeah.
Whether he really said it, but even if he didn't say it, it's a good line,
It is, it's a great one.
right?
Yeah.
Okay, so we'll just say it with that disclaimer that we don't know if he actually said it, but even if he didn't say it, it's a good line. He was fighting and he came in to a certain Jewish city on Tisha B'Av. And he walked into the shul and he saw the Jews mourning and they were crying. And he said to himself, he said, certainly they're mourning over the fact that they're about to lose their homes and their town and their village. I'm taken over. And he tried to find out, and he asked somebody, are they mourning because of Napoleon? Of course, nobody knew who he was. And they said, no, we're actually mourning our temple. He says, your temple, tell me about this temple. He says, well, about 1,800 years ago, 1,700 years ago, it was destroyed and building in Jerusalem, and we mourn it to this day. And the line that they say, he said, is, a people that is so connected to their temple that 1,700 years later they're still mourning, they're not going anywhere. And that's the truth. That is the truth. We're not going anywhere. And since then, we've lived through multiple Tisha B'Avs and multiple different types of destructions. As we say in the Seder, and it's become real this year, B'chol dor vador, omdim aleinu lechalotenu. In every generation, they rise against us to destroy us. But Hashem saves us from their hand. Meaning, because we're connected to an eternal God, therefore we are eternal. L'chaim.